You're listening to the All People podcast, sponsored by Go Sherm, where we celebrate the essential elements of DEI that unite all people. And now, here are your podcast hosts, Ms. Lakita Harmon and Dr. Nadia Saluk. Welcome back to the All People podcast. Nadia, are you ready for this conversation today? Because I know I am.
Yeah, I'm definitely ready. After our first session, I got really excited preparing for this one.
I know, me too. And listen, guys, we are so excited to dive into part 2 of our conversation on microaggressions. In our last episode, we laid the groundwork for understanding what microaggressions are, how they show up in everyday interactions, and of course, the emotional and psychological impact that they can have in the workplace. And we want to give a huge thank you again to our incredible guests from our part 1 episode, Miss Adrienne Hunt and also Ms. Alina Mai, for sharing their powerful insights and experiences. And it was truly an eye-opening discussion that really sparked a lot of important conversations. Now, in part 2 today, we are going to be building on that foundation by exploring the concept of intersectionality. So, how microaggressions impact individuals differently based on their race, their gender, as well as their cultural background itself. And today's episode is going to focus on the unique challenges that come with navigating these multiple identities, as well as the resilience and strategies our guests have developed in response. We are so honored to be joined by our 2 exceptional guest speakers today who will definitely share their experiences. And first, starting with Mr. Delroy Waugh. And before we dive into today's discussion, let me introduce you to this incredible guy. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I want to take some time to introduce our first exceptional guest, and that is Mr. Delroy Waugh. There's a lot that I can say about him, but you know what? I don't think I'll do it enough justice. So let me just go ahead and read his bio. Everybody, Delroy Waugh II, he is a senior talent acquisition leader. He's a leadership development coach, and he is the CEO of Adibe Collaborative, which is a social impact company focused on providing tools and resources for measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion impact in the nonprofit sector. Now, with extensive experience in recruitment, talent strategy, and DEI program management, Delroy has worked across industries including genomics, software development, and education, bringing a people-first approach to talent acquisition. He is also the creator of the PQ, which stands for Power Quotient Assessment, which helps organizations measure the effectiveness of their programs and their participants' potential for success. Delroy's mission is to drive meaningful change by helping organizations foster cultures of inclusion and belonging where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. He holds an MBA from the Crumber Graduate School of Business. Okay, shout out to Rollins College. I'm also an alumni there. And has led leadership development and social impact programs, both in the corporate world and within his own ventures. Delroy's passion for DEI, it stems from personal experiences and a commitment to building bridges of opportunity for underrepresented communities. Everybody, please welcome Mr. Delroy Waugh.
Thank you. And I'm very excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. So thank you.
We are so excited to have you.
Well, I have the pleasure of introducing Miss Cynthia Blackwell. I've known Cynthia probably about 8 years now. We've worked together in different organizations, bringing leadership coaching to the industries that I have worked in. And so I'm really excited to have her join our podcast today. She is currently a current colleague of mine at Community Legal Services, serving as our Chief Growth Officer and helping us really get our initiatives off the ground and running. But, Cynthia has so much information, such a wealth of experience. I'm actually going to turn it over to Cynthia so that she can introduce herself and exactly all the gems that she can bring to us and to the audience.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Nadia. I'm just so happy that I get to be here with all of you today. So my focus in my current role is focused on growth, but strategic and intentional growth, and supporting explosive success, but again, strategic and intentional. I bring my experiences from, training and workshops on communication, leadership, sales, business development, fundraising, to executive coaching, leveraging my knowledge and experience of personalities, specifically DISC, and then also the 5 Languages of Appreciation at Work by Dr. Chapman and Dr. Paul White, which is really the 5 love languages. If you're in a relationship, you need to know about the 5 love languages. So then that way your communication can improve in your relationships. And so Nadia is correct. Her and I have had an opportunity, almost a decade now, of working together in just different aspects, from leadership development in a classroom style to one-on-one, helping people to identify their path for explosive success, both personally and professionally. Because when we want success, we want balanced success on both sides. Otherwise, you've got joy at work, but you're miserable at home, or you've got joy at home and you're miserable at work. We want both. So,
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. And so, Lakita, let's jump right in.
Let's get going. I have been waiting for this, and I cannot wait for the audience to hear what these two have to share. So without further ado, guys, let's jump into our very first question. And this is for the both of you to answer. How have your intersecting identities, such as race, gender, and cultural background, shaped your personal experiences with microaggressions, both in and outside of the workplace? And I'll start with you, Delroy.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. It's interesting because, when I think about a lot of the microaggressions that I faced, particularly in the workplace, it's interesting because I think I deal with like the same one that like all people of color deal with to some extent. And apologies, my puppy's going a little crazy right now if you're hearing some sound in the background. But the one that comes to mind most for me is, like, I had an untraditional kind of education. And so I actually didn't finish my bachelor's degree until a couple of years ago, maybe like 3 years ago. And then I rolled right into my MBA. And so a lot of my early career microaggressions, I'm a Black man. I was working in test prep at the time. And so it's kind of layered when you talk about the intersectionality. It wasn't just about the race, but it was also about like, oh, but how are you teaching me how to get into college and you're not in college, or you didn't finish college, right? Like, and so I faced a lot of those types of microaggressions like really, really early in my career. And before that, being someone, I was born and raised in Jamaica. And so I spent, the first 15 years of my life in Jamaica before moving to the US. I then was in Jamaica, Queens, right? So then I'm around people who look like me as well. And then from there moved into like a predominantly white institution for college. And I think that's really where my first experience with microaggressions began. And it was a lot of what they call like the micro invalidations. Like, oh, you're not Black, you're Jamaican. You're not, like, almost kind of like trying to pull me out of this world and like minimizing my experience as a Black person because I had this other identity that was maybe a little bit more palatable, a little bit more welcoming as a Jamaican. And so that's where a lot of those kind of my early microaggressions come from. Now that I'm like a little bit more senior in my career, I start to face a lot of like the competency ones, like people questioning my professional maturity is the word that has been used. Like, maybe you just need to be like professionally mature. And I'm like, I don't think that's the thing. I'm bringing you a problem that as a team we should solve. It's not about professional maturity. And so those are I'd say the big ones that I've faced in my career, both and outside as well.
Okay, that's good. What about you, Cynthia?
I had to write notes down because that was so good. So, for me, out of the 4 of us, I come from an older generation. So I have a few years on the 3 of you. So for me, I'm going to start there first. being the oldest of four girls, so girls, I turned 58 in October, so in a few weeks. And so for me, it's been more of, well, you're a girl, okay? Girls have their place. And then second, for me, it was difficult to fit. No, I wouldn't say difficult for me, but more so for others. My dad has blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's a coal miner's son from West Virginia. And then my mom, dark complected, Mexican, jet black hair, tiny petite, high cheekbones, didn't speak English until she started kindergarten. And so, growing up in Texas, I would get this at the first day of school, Cynthia Plaster, because my maiden name was Plaster. So a little Hispanic girl, the teacher do roll call, Cynthia Plaster, and I'd go here and she would look, or he would look, and then look at the paper again and then look at me. Are you sure? It was kind of the look that I got.
Yeah,
And then,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. And so fitting into, even as a girl growing up in school or even as an adult professionally, fitting into the Hispanic culture, professionally. So let's talk work, and then fitting into the white culture and coming back over here to this side. And so it's a little, while I feel comfortable in both environments, other people tended to, question it or attempt to make me feel somewhat uncomfortable. And here's a perfect story. I was the regional director for a telecommunications company. This was like 20 years ago because my oldest granddaughter just turned 18. Well, so I'm at a Hispanic chamber event and I paid $10,000 for me and my team and the company to be at the Hispanic business conference. Well, the majority of the people there are speaking Spanish. And yes, I do speak Spanish, but I speak more Tex-Mex, or here in Florida, we call it Spanglish. And so a lady comes up and she starts asking me questions in Espanol. And I responded to her in Spanish. I understand a lot. I speak a little because I think in English first. She looked at me dead blank and said, well, then you don't belong here, and walked away. And so those are some of the challenges, you know what I mean, that I have faced. But I will say for me, I use the word challenges because to me, a challenge is merely an opportunity to overcome whatever the other people's perceptions are. And if anything, it just challenged me to practicar hablando español every day. So practice my Spanish every day so I can get better. So that's my biggest answers to that question.
Yeah. I definitely find when people don't know or don't seek to understand another person's differences, that they really tend to try to put you in their own little box itself of what makes sense to them, which is not necessarily correct, and that's why conversations like this are so important, so we can educate and bring awareness and so we can grow.
Yep, definitely.
Absolutely agree.
All right. So I'm going to jump to the next question. In what ways do you think microaggressions affect professional development, leadership opportunities, or career progression for people with multiple marginalized identities?
I'll jump in here. I think it has a big impact, right? And it has a compounding impact when we're talking about intersectionality, when folks are dealing with lots of identities that have disadvantage in the corporate space. And my experience, like a lot of my career has been in, like I said, talent acquisition, talent development. And so I think you see a lot of that in those spaces. And I've had experiences where, maybe it's not me, but I'm working with someone and we're talking about, how do we get X person into a leadership role, or this role is available. And I remember very specifically one of the first instances in the space where it wasn't me, but we were talking about like a new role that had opened up. And we were recommending candidates for like an internal fill. And I brought a candidate up who's a Black woman, exceptional, like her numbers are exceptional. Like she's leading her team. She's just crushing it in work. And the conversation was like, well, like I don't think she has enough tact. And I was like, well, what do we mean by that? Like flesh that out for me, which for me is always the way to like, when you hear these things, how do you deal with them? I'm like, well, flesh that out for me. What do you mean by she doesn't have the right tact for this role? And I was like, well, I think sometimes when she's having discussions, she just gets like really passionate and animated. And I'm like, so she's defending herself in a conversation. Like, is she being unprofessional? Like, is she saying things that aren't true? Like, is she like belittling other people? No, she's just speaking passionately about her work. Well, all these other people speak passionately about their work and they're in leadership roles. So what's different about the way she addresses them? And these are just like little small examples of like, someone says that and it's like in some cases a lot of people in the room let those things slide. Like, oh, she doesn't have the right tact. And it's like, yeah, I understand. And I'm like, no, what does that mean? And so when you have conversations like those, particularly in organizations who are struggling with diversity in their leadership, right? You see a lot of organizations that's like, we're so diverse. And then I'm like, let me see your org chart. And all the diversity is at the bottom. And then you start to have conversation about why haven't these folks moved up? And you hear those conversations like, oh, it's the tact. They're just so passionate about how they talk about things. They're a little aggressive about how they work. And so I think it can have really negative impacts on folks' professional development. Not even just from the context of like, hey, we have a promotion, but hey, we have an opportunity. Like we have a stretch project that we want to assign to someone. If you're not getting those opportunities to flex and show your skills because someone has these like, microaggressions that they're using that they may not even know that they're deploying against you, you're not even being given the opportunity to show what you can do. And so I think it can have an outsized impact on folks' opportunity. And we know like Black women especially get the brunt of this in a lot of organizations, right? Like there's a term, misogynoir, just for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think about that, Cynthia?
Well, for me, again, I'm going to go back to a girl and Hispanic, you know what I mean? Or daddy used to say half breeds. That's what he used to call us, half breeds. And so I would get more of, lack of that certificate from an educational standpoint. They would use that. Second, it would be, my lack of professional experience in a particular role, like leadership. Now, I share that to also say that at 58, because I'm going to say, may as well say I'm 58 because I have less than 30 days, right? Let's just start celebrating birthday month. But for me, I learned very early and quickly that if I'm going to get a no, or if I feel like walls are up for me, then I go look for other opportunities and will go around that particular person to find out is it just that individual, or is this a corporate culture and a leadership belief? And if it is a leadership belief, then I go elsewhere. That's just what I've done. Or if I do find, and I have had, just like all of us have had those mentors or leaders that actually listen and, are for us. And so I work with them and allow them to take that aggression and go fight that battle for me. So then that way I can get into the roles that I want, because I'm a firm believer in that if I want it, I'm going to go after it and I'm going to make it happen. And whether it's at this organization or another, if people here at this organization do not value me and do not see it, then I go elsewhere. I will go find a room. That means I'm in the wrong room. It is unfortunate that we do experience that, all of us in some way, shape, or form. It is sad. What I have learned over the years that in working with more of the younger generation, so I'm a cusper between a Gen Xer and a baby boomer. There are some baby boomers that don't act that way and don't think that way. And then there are some Gen Xers that don't act, more Gen Xers that don't act that way, don't think that way. And I'm finding more millennials, exennials that that are pushing more away from that stereotype and that wavelength and thinking in their leadership. And they're actually, as they're maturing in their profession and in their professional career, they are pursuing different attitudes. They want you to, they're asking to be called out when they do conduct themselves inappropriate or in that manner. And so just from that standpoint, again, because I'm positive, I go looking for those individuals to align myself with and attach myself. So hence why Nadia and I have been friends all these years and we work so well together. So I hope I answered the question appropriately and gave you insight into my experience.
I don't know. I would definitely say you did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I
I
was
wanted
gonna, oh, go ahead, Nadia. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Well, no, I wanted to add to it because I'm glad you brought up, age, because we're speaking a lot about gender roles and race, but there's so much microaggressions when it comes to age. And, for me, like next week, I'll be 47. Many people assume I'm younger, and I've lost opportunities and almost lost the current opportunity I am in because there's this perception that I'm younger and I should not have the experience as listed, or I don't have enough experience. And I've noticed as I've gone to different conferences and have associated with other professionals, when I state my title as a chief HR officer, oftentimes I get, shocked in return because there's an assumption that because I appear I'm younger than I am, that I should not have this role or this title. And so that's something as well that we really have to pay attention to when we look at microaggression.
I can't agree with you more on that, Nadia. I can, speaking from my own experience, I can say myself, as the president of an HR consulting firm, when I share that information with some people, they're like, really? You're so young. I've actually heard that from others. And I'm like, well, how old do you need to be? Is there a particular age that you have to be to where you're qualified or I can be credentialed in your eyes to actually have an HR firm itself? I like to say, I'm like, I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah.
I'm younger than, I am, but I've definitely gone through that itself. And I love both your answers, Delroy and Cynthia, for just, what you shared in that respect. So the next question I have for you guys is, in your opinion, how do cultural as well as, gender-based microaggressions differ from those, that's based purely on race, and how have you navigated those complexities in your professional as well as your personal life?
Delroy, you go.
Yeah, so I'll share one because as I heard the conversation about age, and it's crazy sometimes like you reflect when you're in these spaces. And I just earlier this year went through a process where I'd been working with a group of folks to like working on my consulting business, right? And trying to take us to the next level. And we got all the way at the end. And one of the folks there was like, "Oh, Delroy, I thought you were like 24." And I was like, what? I was like, I've been a part of this program for all this time. I'm 34, by the way. Like, I submitted an application. You've seen my resume. And when we had that conversation, it just kind of like reopened everything for me because, like, there was a lot of it that I was like, I'm communicating myself pretty clearly, but I'm not being heard. And then when that realization happened, I was like, has this person this whole time been thinking that, oh, I'm this young, unexperienced person who doesn't know what I'm talking about? And as that shaped the whole experience that we've just had for the last, 6 to 7 months working on this project together. And I was just like, wow, like the thought of being a victim in some ways of this microaggression that I didn't even know was expressed until the end, and how that shaped the experience and interaction that we had was just like so profound. And the conversation that Cynthia and y'all were having about the age just like brought that up for me. But I think a lot of the microaggressions that are outside of race that all like hint at like how people should behave, right? Especially when they get cultural, right? How you should behave and like what are the expectations, for instance, around like me as a man, and like, am I supposed to be like this strong, decisive leader? And like, am I allowed to flex in and have empathy? And I've certainly had situations. I remember specifically, I would got brought into an organization to like lead a new team, and when I got there, the team is all women, right? And my functional expertise at that time, like I had the kind of general but not the niche functional expertise. And so I had to invest a lot in like building those relationships with my team and figuring out where their strengths were. And there was one woman in particular that I was like super impressed with. And I was like, she can lead this team. And the initial feedback that I got was like, I don't know. She seems like very emotional. She, brings all of that into it. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. She is an emotional person, but what she's talking about and the thing that she's suggesting, like, even if she's getting like a little emotional when she's talking, and we're not talking like she's not crying or like outbursting. It's just someone who wears their emotions on her sleeve. So when she gets excited, you see it. When she's upset, you see it. But she still presents everything in a very decisive, straightforward manner. And we had to help to break down that misperception of her with the leadership team in order to get her in that place. And it was me kind of just like being a shield for her, right? Like, oh no, she's gonna manage the team so I can step away and do this work. And so we see a lot of those things come up when we pull outside of that race. It's just like, what do we expect like a leader to be like, for instance? And when you think about that, is like, but when you're thinking about a leader, who's the type of person that you're thinking about, and why can't we flex outside of that view? And so for me, it's all about like how people should behave, and you not fitting into that box. I think someone brought that up earlier. But how do we just like break the box open and say, hey, like, we don't need everyone to fit into this very specific niche thing in order for them to be considered a leader or effective. They can express the ability to do good things without being in those spaces.
Mhm. I think we really need to be intentional with giving people space to really be their authentic selves and not taking that away from them in any kind of way, just based on any preconceived notions that we may have.
Yeah. And it's tough, right? Because we're asking for authenticity, but as Cynthia said, we all have these biases. Whenever you ask people to show up authentic,
Be authentic, but not too passionate and emotional.
right? Yeah, right. And it's like, how do
But
we
be
as
authentic.
leaders make sure that we're recognizing our own biases when we're asking people to be authentic, right? It even comes to like the allyship piece. It's like a lot of the times it's on the folks that are dealing with the microaggressions to go and do the work to identify who the allies are. And in some cases, we're still dealing with microaggressions from those allies that we have to educate them on, that are microaggressions. They're fighting with us, but we're still kind of taking fire from them at the same time. And so like we can have a whole different discussion on like the bring your authentic self to work. I have lots of different feelings on that one. But I think a lot of it is unfortunately still on us as the people who are dealing with these things to navigate, find the allies, educate the allies. And how do we maybe start to shift that paradigm by addressing some of the systemic issues that are there?
Well, one of the things that I would say, and I say this all the time, and I know here at Community Legal Services, I'm irritating people at different times when I say this, and it's get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, then you are stagnant. You're not going to grow personally or professionally, period. And so what I have experienced has been more gender and age, and my physical appearance than removing culture from it. And so gender, from at work to at home. And here is a true story, okay? I love my father-in-law. My husband and I, we just celebrated this year our 33rd wedding anniversary. Okay, so we've got
Congratulations.
11 grandkids. The 11th one was just born. Well, wait a minute. I think she's 5 weeks, 6 weeks old. She's absolutely delicious. Just dip her in ranch and like a chicken wing. But anyway, so my father-in-law, who I absolutely love and adore, he's passed on now. But it was many, many years ago when I was in college and I was determined that I was going to have, a high paying professional job. I love that movie, Working Girl, with great big, really aging myself, even though I've told my age, great big shoulder pads, carrying a briefcase, solving problems, closing deals, negotiating. I'm like, that's going to be me. And I'm going to be making six figures. And my father-in-law does this. You're so cute. You're so cute. Like that would ever happen. You're a girl. And I'm like, Dad, I can't believe you're saying that. I thought you believe in me. He's like, I do. And so I share that because when I've shared it with others, oh my gosh, you're mortified. But listen, I'm dealing with a completely different generation and a different wavelength of thinking. I took it as an opportunity to educate him on how wrong he is. And then a few years later, he apologized to me and recognized where I was going in my career and my education, and the fact that I had 6 children and still was a mom and kept up with, my domestic bliss stuff and went to work. Now, then you go to work and it's, well, women do well in leadership when it comes to the maternal stuff and, mediation and warming things up. But true leadership and women can't do that. I'm like, have you met me? I will rip your head off and deposit the cavity. You do not belong in a human body. So don't underestimate me. You know what I mean? So there were times where I had to turn on, the mean bee at work, right? And then the third thing, I'm going to toot my own horn here without being, unprofessional or, lack of couth here. But I was a pretty girl. I was, built like a brick house, like that song. And so there were times where, being in business development or sales, especially early on in my career, it was like, girl with them legs and that body, just open the door. I'm the big man. I'll come in and close that deal for you. I'm like I need you. What? No. And then the opposite would be true. I would be sitting in front of a decision maker, the owner of a business, and I'm there talking to him about whatever it is I have in my briefcase. And the response would be, well, bring your guy in here, bring your man in here and his pencil. And, he and I will talk and we'll put pencil to paper and see what we can happen. Well, let me tell you, those were some interesting conversations. I would walk out of there and talk about blood being boiled because I'm like, really? There's a brain up here, not here. Come up. And so for me, those were the 3 biggest challenges I would say that I experienced in my career. Again, both personally and professionally, because my dad, being the oldest of 4 girls, Daddy is a good old boy from West Virginia. And so there were times that he said things and my mother would scold him. You have girls, right? Do you want a man, or in the workplace, do you want them to be spoken to like that or treated that way or thought of in that way? And my dad, would look away for a second. And of course, being the oldest, I had to break it in, right? I had to break him in. And so there were even conversations like that. I mean, even now my dad's 80 years old and he'll look at me and he'll go, Cindy, what exactly do you do again? So, anyway, I bantered on, but those were the 3, the 3 categories of disturbing and at the same time opportunities for growth for myself, because I had to choose, am I going to go down this path or am I going to go down this path? I'm going to thrive no matter what environment or atmosphere I'm in, instead of being a victim. So
I absolutely love that. Instead of being a victim, so a victor and not a victim. I love that.
I'm going to thrive no matter where I'm at.
Hey, same for me. I always say that.
And sometimes you can use these, like I know for a fact that I've used microaggressions to my benefit, right? Like I shared earlier about you're not Black, you're Jamaican. And I'm like, sure, if this is what's gonna get me in the door, right? Like I know I'm Black. I know that when I'm walking down the street, the person on the other side doesn't see Jamaican on me, they just see black man, right? Like, but if that mental othering that you're going to do is going to open an opportunity for me so I can reach while I climb, then I'll take it, like I'll come in and take it. And I think, I say like I grew up in a space where like my family in Jamaica was very poor on my mom's side where I grew up. But my dad's side was a little bit more well off and they paid for me to go to private school. And so I learned very early how to navigate these two very different worlds. And so I think that's why for a long time, like early in my career, I was so kind of just like immune to some of the microaggressions, which is like, it's fine. Like I've been dealing with this since I was a baby. So I understand how to like hear those things, like try to push back on them a little, like enough so that they notice that, hey, this thing that you're saying is kind of not great to say, or the way that you're thinking is kind of not great to think, but not push back so much that now I have lost the influence and I have lost the grace to continue to do the work that I need to do to improve my station so that I can help others improve theirs.
Well said. Well said.
I tell you what, just the stories that you have told, has me at the edge of my seat because it's just so much experience and so much that you all have had to overcome or see others overcome. So for my next question, and I think you all even touched on it a little bit, but I want to ask the question specifically. But can you share any examples of moments when you felt empowered to address microaggressions directly, or when you saw others effectively step in as allies? What strategies worked and what could have been better?
Oh, you go first. I like it when you go first because you have the best answers. You speak so eloquently. We have got to be friends after that, Delroy.
I love both your answers. I'm just sitting here like, just guys, keep it coming.
I'm just being aware.
I haven't had too much to say.
I'm just being aware. I just don't want to always go first, but if you're nominating me, I'll do it.
Nominated, volatile.
I second that.
I think of a really good example here, and I'll give this org a shout out. When I was at First Factory, and their business is like they help organizations in the US accelerate their software development, right? But most of the folks, almost all of the folks that we hired to do that work is in Costa Rica. And there was a lot of, kind of tension a little bit about like the English language proficiency of some of those software developers that we hired, right? Because of the potential that, hey, they may need to interact with clients. And if they can't interact directly with clients in English, things could get a little tense, right? We maybe have clients who want folks who like speak really, really good English. And from my perspective, I was, it was always like, well, we're hiring software developers in a Spanish speaking country. So like one, like the whole environment needs to be examined from that situation. But then two, for us as an org, like how do we make sure that we're good stewards to the people from this country that we're working with? And, the conversation was initially kind of tense because like I'm a pusher when it comes to stuff like this. So I'm just like, hey, what can we do in order to get our people to this place? And eventually my boss came back and he's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to invest in not just English classes, but like business English classes for these folks. We're going to create this layer of management, right? That will interact directly with the client and serve as a liaison between the developers and the clients, so that like even if the developer doesn't have the strongest English, we can bring them in, get them that training, right? And still have the impact of like, hey, they're going to do great work for us and we're going to help them develop this skill that they're trying to develop anyway, because they want to get into organizations like this. And for me, it was just like such a breath of fresh air, because a lot of the times and I've worked in other organizations where it's like, we are not interested in helping people solve that barrier. We just want the people who speak good English, even though we're doing recruiting in like a majority Spanish speaking country. And so for me, that was like a really big leap forward for this organization to take, and a risk for them to take as well, right? Because like you don't know how long it's going to take for someone to get from, proficiency level 1 to proficiency level 10. But the fact that they were willing to make that investment in the people in order for it to benefit the business, for me, was like a huge show of allyship, because that is putting your money and your business where your mouth is, right? Like you are putting business initiatives on the line to say, hey, we need this to work in order to continue to be successful. And so I thought that was great. And that like, even in implementing and putting that program in, it was like they gave the green light, but then turned it over to some of like the local folks who are working there to figure out, hey, what's the best way to incorporate this into the workforce? What are the type of conversations that we're having with clients now where we'd want folks to be able to navigate so that we can like specifically identify where that training should start and stop in order for it to be effective. And I just thought like that was great, right? Like to empower the other people to make sure that we're able to take care of this work through allyship.
Wow, that was good. I was waiting until you were done talking so I didn't interrupt you. That was so good. So for me, there have been, and I'll touch on personal and professional. So the first person that taught me how to stand up for myself is my mother. Now, again, my mom didn't learn English until she started kindergarten. Okay. And so my mom experienced a lot of racism growing up. And there were times where even now my mom thinks that that's what's going on because that's what she's used to, when in fact, I see, no, mama, this lady's just a bitch. It's not because you're Mexican. But anyway, I would also say my dad, because I remember when I was about 14, 15 years old, I was a very shy, timid girl. Now I was hell on wheels at home with my sisters and cousins and very bossy and things like that. But, in the outside world, I was very quiet and shy. And so daddy used to say things to me like, girl, you need to open up your mouth. You need to start speaking your mind. You need to ask for things. Otherwise, you're never going to get it. And so it started at home. And then as I got married and, went out into the world on my own, I started learning and watching, observing people, those that were able to drive initiatives forward positively and negatively, because there's the bully wrong way to do it, right? And then there's the right way to do it with the facts and, influencing, championing something versus bullying and pushing and forcing. You don't get as far with this side, right? And so for me, learning it from that perspective and learning from others. Now, when I was about 38 years old, I got into about 36, 37. I'm aging myself again. But anyway, got into the telecommunications, which was very much a competitive local exchange carrier here in the Central Florida market. And so it was a man's world. It was Southeastern based telecom, and it was based out of Huntsville, Alabama. And so there were, out of all of the regional directors throughout the company, there were only 2 female regional directors, and I was one of them. Okay. And so my boss, Wade, I called him Big Daddy, and you'll appreciate this. He's about 4'10", and I'm 5'4". So I called him Big Daddy because this man coached me and mentored me to get into that role, coached me and mentored me to be the top rep within the territory, and then started coaching me to go up, challenging me, asking me questions. What do you want in your career? Do you want to be a leader? Because there are those that can there are those that can do and be very successful. There are those that can teach others how to do it and be very successful, but there's a smaller few that can do both. And so he, again, supported me, helped me to get to the next level. And this man, I heard him more than once rip an executive's head off in a professional way if he spoke about me in a derogatory manner. She's a girl. Well, she's got a pretty face. Is that why you put her in this role? Oh, she's just a girl. What does she know? She doesn't know what she's talking about, because it's technology and it's different, right? And so just having him have my back and believe in me. Now, don't get me wrong. There were times where I knew he was coming, and that little wrinkle right there belongs to him, because I knew when he was coming, I was going to get my rear chewed out for something, because, I really took advantage of the fact that I've got that D part of my personality that's demanding and bossy after raising 6 kids. And sometimes I would step out of bounds. Well, that's how you get things done sometimes. But anyway, appreciating the fact that I had someone like him to have my back, coach me, and teach me the right way to approach things. So, yeah.
That's good, Cynthia. It actually reminds me of, a situation during my time back in corporate. And this was a moment that really stood out to me because, it was a professional setting. And I witnessed a colleague of mine that was being interrupted repeatedly during a meeting, which, sometimes that's often what can happen not only to women, but also people of color in like workplace discussions. And instead of letting it slide, there was another team member that was present in that meeting. And he, he said, I would like to hear, and I'm not going to say the person's name, so and so finish their thought.
Mm-hmm.
And just with that happening, it was a simple but very powerful act of allyship. And that moment itself, it was empowering for everybody in the room because it shifted the dynamic itself and it allowed space for voices that were being overlooked, as well as, just downplayed in many ways. And I felt that, what worked was the immediacy of the response itself. So stepping in right as it happened and not waiting, and the ally, they didn't wait until after the meeting to discuss it, which to me made it much more of an impactful type of action. But I think that it could have, have made it even better is if the leader of the meeting had reinforced that behavior by creating a much more structured environment for contributions, from the start itself. So, when leaders actively foster inclusivity, it definitely empowers everybody to address microaggressions as they occur.
And teaches us as an example of how to do it for others. Because I'm with you, or do it for ourselves. Because I am one to call someone's behavior out in 2 ways. One, I'll do what I call the verify game. Okay, so let me make sure I heard you correctly. This is what you're saying. Okay. And if you would please allow me to finish and complete my thought, because you've interrupted me 3 times as we have been discussing this. And I'm a rudis interruptus. Okay. I know I do it. And I call myself out when I do it. Nadia will tell you. But I'm also strong enough in my skin now that I will call out someone else's behavior, especially if I feel that there will be an impact, whether it's I'm going to add or teach someone something, or it's just that I'm going to feel better after walking out of the room because they're just not going to change who they are. But I got to call them out. And so I feel better about my humanness,
And I could definitely say I have definitely been one to call out others people's, behavior at times. I, make every intention to do it in love. So that way it doesn't come across, strong or offensive in any kind of way, because I am seeking to certainly educate and create change.
Yes. And positively impact another human being, whatever that might look like.
And hopefully they pay it forward and teach someone else,
God willing.
But I think that's you mentioned like calling it out in a positive way to create change. And for me, the thing that's always in the back of my mind, because I've been like, this has come up against me too. It's like, oh, I'm being aggressive. And I recently learned from Clerk Russell in a session that she did that, no, we're not aggressive, we're assertive. And I kind of shift in the mindset. Of like, oh, I need to call this thing out. But I'm sitting there like, okay, I want to call this out. How can I say this in a way that people aren't going to be like, well, now Delroy's being aggressive about this thing because he's Black and something's happening to Black people, right? And so I'm doing the mental work to be like, okay, this is how I'm going to say it. And to your point, Cynthia, I'm trying to address it in the moment, but I'm also filtering it through the not aggressive black man filter that's in my head, which is just like a societal microaggression, right?
That we do to ourselves.
Yeah. Because I was gonna say too, like the whole conversation around imposter syndrome, man, I had it so bad. Until I started getting into spaces with people who gave me imposter syndrome, and I was like, oh, I'm fine. I was like, okay. I see the work quality, I see the product, I hear the conversations, and I'm like, okay, I do think I belong here now that I'm here. When I wasn't here, I was intimidated. Now that I'm here, not so much.
Right.
See, Bruno Mars says it best. Mwah, mwah, kiss myself. I'm so pretty.
I love Bruno, by the way. So this guys leads, directly into the next question I have, which is, in your opinion, how do organizations often overlook the compounded impact of microaggressions on individuals, with intersecting marginalized identities? And in your opinion, what steps could HR or even leadership take to better support employees?
Am I going again first, Cynthia?
We've nominated you, Delroy.
You just open up so well, my friend.
I think the biggest thing I see in this space is that they too often get treated as one-off, and not like a part of like a systemic issue, right? And so I've brought things up to HR myself about like things that have happened to me and things that have happened to other people. And it's always like, they have good intention, or maybe it was just this one time. And I think when you treat issues that get bottled up like that as one-offs, then you as an organization don't put structure around how do we catalog these things? How do we organize them? How do we know when they're happening, right? It's like you wouldn't do that with performance management. You wouldn't do that with someone who isn't doing well in their work. You wouldn't do that if these were like overt things that were happening negatively in your org. So for me, that's where it starts. It's like a lot of organizations treat this as like a one-off interpersonal thing, and they're not recording that these instances are happening, and they're not seeing the data, right, around the fact that actually this is happening a lot. And if you're not open as an org to looking at, collecting, and analyzing that data, then you're sending the signal that like, hey, these microaggressions actually don't matter that much to us. And that's been for me the experience I've had in most organizations that I've been a part of, even the ones who have strong DEI structures and work in place. When it comes to the microaggressions, it's always like, we're going to treat this as a one-off thing, and we're going to handle it in a one-on-one with HR and this, and like nothing gets recorded, nothing gets written down. And it's really hard to fix a systemic issue with one-off band-aids, right? And so I think that for me is both like the issue that I see and the suggestion. It's like, if you want to fix this, if you want to address it in a way that's going to be meaningful and transformative, like you have to have a structure in place to help people identify when these things are happening, create brave spaces for them to bring it forward, and then know who the people are in your organization who are committing these microaggressions frequently, and give them the training that they need to become aware of their biases so that they can start to slowly reject them, right? It's not going to happen right like super quickly and overnight, but like if we don't have processes in place to performance manage microaggressions, like they're never going to go away.
I could not agree with you more on that, Delroy. I mean, spoken like a true HR leader right there.
Well, see, this would, I'm in complete agreement with you in that many organizations that I have worked with treated it as more of a one-off, not specific to microaggression, but a one-off, and, oh, that's just Bob being Bob. It'll pass. Or that's Michelle thinking the way Michelle does. She's just sensitive. Instead of looking at the big picture and as an opportunity to educate and strengthen the foundation of trust between leadership and staff, and staff with staff. Strengthen the corporate culture. The loyalty. People that are happy and love where they work, love the people that they work with, and the culture and all that. People don't leave for money. They leave people. They leave, you know what I mean? The group. They're not leaving and chasing the almighty dollar, even if they tell you, well, they offered me $10,000 more a year. How much really is that? No, 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 no. What's the real reason why you want to leave? And so I go back to, Delroy, you're spot on. It shouldn't be treated as a one-off. These are things that have been occurring in society since probably the beginning of time. Okay. And they're going to continue in any environment, whether it's at home within the family, because more families don't look the same like they do. I mean, my grandkids and kids, we're just, reflection of the entire world, Asian and everything, or, all cultures. And so we need to recognize it and have a conversation about it and address it, that wavelength in thinking, because people don't know unless you teach them or unless you tell them. And I include myself in that, until we stop and we look at a situation differently or through a different lens, that's when we're going to continue to learn. And by the way, at this phase in life, I'm looking at different ways to continue to exercise my brain so that way I don't 20 years from now when I'm 80 be struggling with dementia or Alzheimer's, And if I do, well, my brain is charging so well that nobody knows I've got it. Anyway, that's my thought. Is it needs to be stopped. It needs to stop being treated as, a one-off particular situation with a particular individual. Take advantage of the opportunity to teach and to grow people within your organization, because if you don't train them and help them grow, someone else will.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So my next question for you, Delroy and Cynthia, what are some coping mechanisms or tools you found particularly helpful in dealing with the emotional and psychological toll of microaggressions, given your unique background and identity?
For me, the honest answer to this question is my network. I feel that the group of people, we talked about finding those allies and making sure that you have people in your corner and finding mentors. And that comes with its own challenges, right? Because we talked about sometimes you have to educate those people as well. But they're down to go on that journey with you. And for me, it's certainly been my network. I have been blessed with a group of really great friends, a lot of them Black women. That's why I love my Black sisters, my aunties, my moms, everyone. Because there's been a lot of times where I've faced situations at work where a leader will have a conversation with me, whether it's about my competence or as I would be being aggressive in a conversation. And that's why a lot of the times now I'm you know what, let me just send this email or let me send this Slack because I need something archivable for myself so I can reflect on it, right? And also so I can share it to my friends and be hey, was I wild? Was this someone said this was disrespectful? Here's the full conversation. Really to get that feedback, because sometimes it is you try to solve these problems on your own, right? You try to reflect on these things on your own, and it can put you in a really negative headspace sometimes if you don't have folks in your community who, one, are maybe facing these things too and can help you navigate them, and then others outside of your community who are just allies who can help validate that, actually the way you brought this up is pretty professional, right? The way you brought this up is the way I would expect a leader of your caliber to bring it up. The way you address this issue is the right way to address this issue and in the timely space. And so for me, it's really been, when we're talking about coping mechanisms, it's really been my network, the ability to go and get feedback from people who look and don't look like me, that I can have these open conversations with, just to make sure that I'm right sized in the way that I'm reacting and like internalizing feedback that I'm getting. And in some cases, they've been like, "Oh no, Delroy, you was wrong for that," right? And you need people like that in your space.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, 100%, right? You need the cheerleaders, but you also need the people who are going to sit with you and be like, "Bro, that wasn't it," right? Because you don't grow in a situation where everyone's just telling you, "Great job, great job, great job."
Correct.
Failure is a part of it. But for me, it's really, really been my network that has been my biggest coping mechanism when I'm dealing with these states. I've also, I pop in and out of therapy as needed. I don't do it ongoing, but like if there's something that comes up, I'll be like, "Hey, I need to talk about this thing," and we'll talk about it. Maybe we'll do a couple sessions and I feel good and I'll pop back out. And then a couple months later, I'm like, "Hey, are you still available? I need to talk about this new thing." And so I flex in and out of therapy when needed as well, because I also think that it's good to get that super unbiased opinion on stuff. But and like therapy or coaching, whatever type of one-on-one interaction you can get with someone who's going to help hold the mirror up to you. I think for me, those have been the biggest like coping mechanisms and tools when I'm dealing with these microaggressions.
That's excellent. And I definitely, want to commend you on, just what you are utilizing that brings that, self-awareness and, growth opportunity to you. And I will say this, it's becoming more of a common, topic where we hear Black men being in therapy and it not being like a certain stigma against it or like, ooh, they're crazy or whatever, but actual, being vulnerable enough to step into obtaining that type of, additional support. I definitely commend you on that.
Thank you. It's tough. I'm Jamaican, so I tell my people I'm doing therapy and they ask all the questions. Is everything okay? Well, no, it's not okay. That's why I'm going to therapy.
It's there for a reason.
Right. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's three things. Number one is myself, reaching into myself, because I am a high I, if you know DISC, which means influential, instinctive, you know what I mean, intuitive. And so I start having a conversation with my spidey senses and my three brains. Am I overreacting? I start asking myself, where am I at with this? Why do I feel this way? Why? Okay. And then I very quickly jump into number two, which is falling back on scripture and prayer and asking for spiritual guidance and inviting that spiritual guidance. Because I tend to allow my mouth to write a check my rear end can't cash sometimes. But as I've matured, I've learned to, turn the filter on a little bit and not react. Okay. And so then the third thing, I'm going to go with you, Delroy, and that is having conversations with that tribe of brothers and sisters in Christ and in faith that I can reach out to, that yes, will go, girl, we need to pray because that's real. Or, girl, you're allowing your eye to go way off on a tangent now. You need to pull yourself back in. That's not, because like you, Delroy, I'll give them all of the facts and information. Okay, tell me, am I crazy? Okay, tell me, am I imagining something? Because as you can see, I'm very passionate about everything, right? My dad used to say, if I sat on my hands, I wouldn't be able to have an intelligent conversation. It's probably true. But yeah, for me, it's falling back on my faith first, and my gut, because our intuition and our gut really is on our side, and it's our natural guidance system. And the closer you are with your internal guidance system, the better decisions you can make moving forward. And then again, relying on that third component, relying on that network of people that I can trust, but also that are different from me, that, think different than me, that approach things in life different than me. I mean, almost complete opposite personality of me, because they're going to see things that I am, rose-colored glasses, I'm blinded to see. And then also, very importantly, we need to be open to hearing what the other person says to us when they call BS, because, that happens sometimes. Or being told that, no, we're wrong. We're wrong. Or we made a mistake. You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have done that. So yes, those are my three.
And those are definitely great ones. I can't agree with you more when it comes to that spiritual aspect. But, like you both said, your tribe is everything. Your tribe can hold a mirror up to you. Your tribe can certainly help you to grow stronger and be able to educate others in these types of areas. So I love both those answers. Man, I can really just continue to sit here and talk to you guys. I mean, you guys have just shared so much, but I know we're coming up on time. So as we get ready to close, I had one specific question for you, Delroy, and it's because I came across this article recently, and it was titled "The Untold Microaggressions Towards Men." And within this article, it stated that Black men reported to having their confidence questioned 27% more than all men. And then Hispanic men have reported the same experience at 10.5% more than all men. So I'm definitely curious. Is this something that you think that you have experienced? And can you talk a little bit about that if you have?
Yeah, it definitely is, and it was like interesting to see the article kind of quantify that. And I talked earlier about like, the fact that like I didn't finish college on like the traditional timeline, but just gotten opportunities to do work. And even in some of those spaces, I felt like my competence was questioned in the sense of like, oh, the professional maturity or the quality of the ideas that I would bring to the table would need more scrutiny because I didn't have the bachelor's, right? Even though I'm producing good work. And what that kind of like, I noticed that was happening. And I'm a relator if anyone is like a strength person, like I'm a relator. I've taken the strength assessment like 4 or 5 times. Because every time a new org is like, do the strength, I'm like, yeah, the relator is always number one. And when
we're relating to you today.
Yeah.
And when I recognized that was happening, what I started to do, what we talk about allyship, is like I found the people that I could almost like give my ideas to, right? So have conversations with them about what I was thinking, get them excited about those ideas, and then they would become the champion of the idea for me. And that's really the kind of beginning of like the eroding of my imposter syndrome, right? Because I had it for so long. It's like, hey, I'm bringing these things up, I'm making these suggestions, and they're not really getting the visibility and the seriousness that I thought they should. But then I would like bring them to a colleague that I was working with or bring them to my manager. And then, all of a sudden they're starting to flourish and take hold and they're gripping. And so I've certainly witnessed it on the competence thing. I've had my professional maturity called into question multiple times, particularly when organization is going through change management. And I'm like, hey, I'm having conversations with folks. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm seeing coming. Here's how we prepare for this. I've straight up been told once by a leader who I respect a lot, even to this day, where there was a lot of change happening in the org. And I was like, hey, this part of the org that I'm running, I don't think is going to exist after this change happens. Here's my plan for how we offboard this. And the conversation was just like, hey, look, you don't have the professional maturity to understand this, but like this one thing that you're worried about, I have to worry about 50 other things. So I don't have the time for this. And I was like, well, you hired me to do this one thing. So I only have time for this one thing. And here is the plan that I'm bringing to you for us to discuss, right? But it was still just this feeling of like, your professional maturity isn't at the right place for you to even understand the landscape of what's happening. And it turns out that the plan that I brought to them was the plan that we needed to implement because of what was happening, right? And it took way much longer for us to get to that point because I wasn't given that time and space to reflect, even though you hired me to do this job, you didn't let me do this job, right? So I faced a lot of those tensions in my career. But I think it's like I said, it's like the more I get um, the behind the curtain look, the more I get exposed to higher levels of organization and people who I used to revere. And it's not that I don't revere them anymore, but it's like, oh, we're all just people. We're all just figuring it out. We all have great ideas. We all have bad ideas. But it's certainly something that I navigated much harder at the top of my career. And it's probably one of the reasons why I finished bachelor's and I ran and get an MBA right after, because I was like, I need to get this giant chip off my shoulder. Um, and now I feel much more comfortable, but it's certainly something that I've navigated earlier in my career, and it definitely eroded trust with some managers and stakeholders. And in some cases, like an exhausting over justification of like my worth, right? I used to say, oh, I'm gonna fake it till I make it. And I had someone in my tribe was like, no, 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 you don't have to fake anything. And that just hit me so hard that I was like, oh, wow, thank you for saying that. Like, I've just been saying this for so long that I didn't realize that I had made it, right? Until this person again held that mirror up and was like, no, 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 you belong. So yeah, I've certainly dealt with those microaggressions, and it's good to see the article calls some attention to it.
Cynthia, I have one final question for you. You know, you've referred to your Hispanic heritage background throughout this podcast. So if you could share with, the audience, what other microaggressions do Hispanics face in the workplace?
I will speak for myself. And that is this. Hispanics are loud. Hispanic, like Hispanic women, a lot of makeup, or just overall the way that they think, the way that they, carry themselves, they conduct themselves. And so, me having both, I can go there. Si yo puedo, and I am loud. So Nadia's office is right next to mine, so I'm very cognizant not to be too loud.
That's why I put my earbuds on, because I could hear you through the wall.
But yeah. But then there's also the positives of that, and the positives are, Hispanic people tend to be very loyal. When they make friends with people, you become a part of the family, como la familia, you know what I mean? And so we don't, you'll hear me even in the office with some staff here, I say, hermanita, my little sister, or, primo, my cousin, everybody's related. If you're Hispanic, you're related somehow, some way, And so misconceptions that aren't true, but then also conceptions that quite frankly they are true, and most Hispanics, but I'm finding that most cultures are this way, in that family comes together, people come together around the table and around food. And so from a coaching perspective, from a business development, sales, fundraising perspective, I leverage that too. And, invite people to spend quality time with me, invite people to break bread. And so, yeah, I hope I answered that question.
Hey, sure did. Thank you.
Definitely did. And so, you know what, as we prepare to wrap up, Nadia and I, we want to thank you both for joining us today. This has been one great conversation, and I know that our audience is going to gain so much from this. So as we wrap up, I just want to leave everyone with one last thought. Keep this in mind. Microaggressions, they might be subtle, but their impact is significant. Okay. And the power to address and dismantle them, it lies in each of us. Whether it's through our own actions or as allies to others, let's definitely commit to staying aware, speaking up, and creating spaces where everyone feels seen, they feel heard, and definitely valued. Change itself, it starts with awareness, but it's sustained through action. So until next time, let's definitely keep the conversation going and continue to grow together.
And as usual, if you have any feedback or questions or topics that you'd like us to address, please send us an email at diversity@gosherm.org.
So next time, guys, see you then.